You're looking at a human skull. It's 300,000 years old, found in Morocco, buried in ancient sediment. The brain inside that skull was the same size as yours, same shape, same capacity. If you could scan it, you'd see the same folds, the same structures, the same hardware. But here's the thing, for the next 260,000 years, the people with those brains left almost nothing behind. No art, no jewellery, no symbols carved into bone, no cave paintings, no burials that suggest they believed in anything beyond death. Just stone tools, the same stone tools, over and over, for hundreds of thousands of years. They had our brains, but they didn't have our culture. Scientists call this the cognitive gap. Some call it the sapient paradox. I think about this sometimes when I'm lying awake at night. We had the hardware. We just weren't running the software yet. Think about this. Modern humans appeared around 300,000 years ago. We know this from fossils, from DNA, from dozens of archaeological sites across Africa. These people looked exactly like us. If you dressed one in modern clothes and put them on a subway, you wouldn't look twice. But they lived in a world we wouldn't recognize. No language as we know it. No stories, no religion, no music. Nothing that makes us feel human. They survived. They spread across Africa. They had children. Those children had children, generation after generation. But nothing changed. The hand axes they made at 300,000 years ago looked the same as the ones made at 100,000 years ago. Identical. Same technique, same shape, same purpose. It's like someone hit pause on human development. The body evolved, the brain grew, but culture stayed frozen. And then, around 40,000 years ago, something switched on. Suddenly, we see cave paintings, beautiful ones, animals rendered in ochre and charcoal, handprints on stone walls, flutes carved from bone, needles for sewing, elaborate burials with grave goods, jewellery made from shells' teeth. The archaeological record explodes. Within a few thousand years, humans are creating art on every continent they inhabit. They're trading goods across hundreds of miles. They're developing different cultures, different styles, different ways of seeing the world. It's not gradual, it's a switch. Off, then on. Scientists have been arguing about this for decades. What happened? What changed? Why did it take so long? Some say language developed. Others say it was social organization. Some think it was a genetic mutation, a small change in how the brain processed information. Others argue it was purely cultural. One group figured something out, and it spread. Nobody knows for sure. We may never know. But tonight, we're going to look at what we do know. The 260,000 years of silence. The sudden explosion of culture. The theories that try to explain the gap. Because somewhere in that darkness something happened. Something that made us human. Not just in body, in mind. Something switched on 40,000 years ago. We have no idea what. But we're going to explore every piece of evidence we have. Here's what we know about those brains, the physical evidence, the actual skulls and bones that tell us what was happening inside. The Jebel Irhoud skulls from Morocco are 300,000 years old. When scientists measured them, they found something remarkable. The brain case was 1,400 cubic centimetres. That's within the range of modern human brains. Some of us today have smaller brains than those ancient people, but size isn't everything. Shape matters too. The frontal lobe is where we do our thinking, planning, abstract reasoning, the kind of mental work that makes us human. In those 300,000-year-old skulls, the frontal lobe was already there, fully formed, ready to go. The temporal lobes handle language processing. They were there too. Same structure as ours, same capacity. The parietal lobes integrate sensory information. They help us understand space and navigate the world. Also present. Also modern. Every piece of hardware was in place, the machinery was ready. Scientists have studied dozens of these ancient skulls, from different sites across Africa, from different time periods. The pattern holds. By 300,000 years ago, the human brain had reached its modern form. Not almost modern, not proto-modern, fully modern. If you could take one of those brains and put it in a baby born today, that child would grow up normal. They'd learn language, go to school, use smartphones, write poetry, do calculus, fall in love. The potential was there, sitting in skulls buried in African soil, waiting. But potential isn't the same as achievement. Having the hardware doesn't mean you're running the software. Think about computers. A brand new laptop has incredible processing power, but without an operating system it's just expensive plastic and silicon. It can't do anything. The capability exists. The performance doesn't. That's what we're looking at with early humans. All the capability, none of the performance. The archaeological record from 300,000 to 100,000 years ago is strangely uniform. Stone tools appear, always the same types, made the same way, used for the same purposes, no innovation, no experimentation, no improvement. At Olora Sile in Kenya, archaeologists found thousands of hand axes. They're scattered across different layers of sediment, spanning 200,000 years, and they're identical. Not similar. Identical. Same size. Same shape. Same napping technique. As if the person who made the oldest one was teaching the person who made the newest one. But 200,000 years separated them. That's 10,000 generations. Imagine if we'd been making the same tools since 198,000 BCE, still using the exact same technology today. No wheels, no agriculture, no metal, no fire, just rocks chipped the same way for 200 millennia. That's what happened. That's the reality we're trying to understand. The tools worked. That's important. These weren't bad designs. A well-made hand axe is an effective tool. Sharp edges, good weight, useful for dozens of tasks. But they didn't evolve. They didn't improve. Nobody thought to make them better. Or maybe they did think about it. Maybe someone had an idea, made something different, and it didn't catch on, died with them. We'll never know. What we do know is this. The cognitive capacity for innovation was there. The brain could handle abstract thought, could plan, could imagine something that didn't exist yet, but for some reason that capacity wasn't being used, not in ways we can detect, not in ways that left traces. Some scientists argue this proves the brain wasn't actually ready, that something was still missing. Some final piece that didn't fall into place until later. Maybe a mutation, a small genetic change that altered how neurons connected, how information flowed, how ideas formed. The FOXP2 gene controls language development. Modern humans have a specific version of this gene. Neanderthals had it too. But earlier humans might have had a different version, one that didn't quite work the same way. If language wasn't fully developed, that would explain a lot. Language isn't just communication. It's how we think, how we organize ideas, how we pass knowledge between generations. Without sophisticated language, each generation starts almost from scratch. They learn from watching, from imitating, but they can't be told why something works, can't discuss improvements, can't build on abstract concepts. The tools stay the same because there's no way to explain how to make them better. But here's the problem with that theory. The brain structures for language were already there. The Broca's area, the Wernicke's area, the neural pathways connecting them, all present, all modern. If the hardware for language existed, why wasn't it being used? Another theory focuses on social organization. Maybe the brains were ready, but the groups were too small, too isolated. Innovation requires a certain population density. You need enough people interacting, enough ideas bouncing around, enough chance encounters between different ways of thinking. Small groups can maintain culture. They can pass down what they know, but they can't easily innovate. There aren't enough minds working on problems, not enough diversity of thought. If early humans lived in tiny bands of 20 or 30 people, scattered across vast territories, innovation would be rare, and when it happened, it might not spread. The next band over might never hear about it. The idea dies with the group. This theory has some support. Archaeological sites from this period are sparse, widely separated. It suggests low population density, small groups moving across large areas. But it still doesn't fully explain the gap, because even small groups can innovate. We've seen it happen. Isolated populations develop unique tools, unique solutions to local problems. Yet for 200,000 years we see almost nothing. No regional variations, no local innovations, just the same tools everywhere. A third theory suggests the environment didn't demand innovation. Life was stable enough. The tools worked well enough. There was no pressure to change. Think about it from a survival perspective. You have tools that get the job done. They help you hunt, process food, build shelter. Your children learn to make them. They survive, have children of their own. Why change? Why risk a new design that might not work as well? If it's not broken, don't fix it. That's a reasonable strategy, especially when failure means starvation. But humans aren't just practical. We're curious. We experiment. We play, even when we don't need to. Modern humans do this constantly. We modify things just to see what happens. We try new approaches even when the old ones work fine. It's part of how we think. So why didn't early humans do the same? They had the same brains. The same curiosity should have been there. Unless it wasn't. Unless something about consciousness itself was different. This is where we get into really strange territory. The idea that having a modern brain doesn't automatically mean having modern consciousness. What if they could think but couldn't reflect on their thinking? Could plan but couldn't imagine themselves in the future? Could remember but couldn't tell stories about those memories? Some philosophers call this the hard problem of consciousness, the question of subjective experience, of what it feels like to be someone. We assume that ancient humans felt the same way we do, that they had rich inner lives, hopes and dreams and fears. But maybe they didn't. Maybe consciousness as we experience it is newer than the brain that produces it. There's no way to test this. Consciousness doesn't fossilize. We can measure brain size, we can see brain structure, but we can't know what it felt like to be alive 200,000 years ago. We're guessing, making inferences from silence. What we can say for certain is this: the brain was ready. Every physical requirement was met. The neurons were there, the structures were there, the connections were there. But something was missing, some spark, some final ingredient that turns biological machinery into human culture. For 200,000 years that ingredient was absent, or present but dormant, or there but not spreading. And then, suddenly it appeared, or activated, or spread like wildfire. The archaeological record changes, dramatically, undeniably. Around 100,000 years ago, we start seeing the first hints. Ochre processing in South Africa, shells with holes drilled through them, possible jewellery, possible decoration. By 70,000 years ago, there's engraved patterns on ochre, geometric designs, abstract symbols, something beyond pure function. By 40,000 years ago, it's everywhere. Cave paintings, sculptures, musical instruments, elaborate burials, trade networks spanning hundreds of miles. The brain didn't change. The fossils from 40,000 years ago look the same as the ones from 200,000 years ago. Same size, same shape, same structure. But the output changed completely. The same hardware, different results. So the brain was ready all along. That much is clear. The capacity existed. The potential was there. What changed wasn't the brain. It was something else. Something we still can't quite identify. Something that turned potential into reality. And that's the mystery. The gap we're trying to understand. The silence we're trying to explain. The brain that didn't wake up. Until suddenly, it did. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. We're all falling asleep to the same mysteries, just hours apart. Subscribe and tell me where you're from and what time it is. Now, let's talk about those 160,000 years of silence. Because after the brain was ready, nothing happened. For a very long time. The tools stayed simple. Life stayed basic. No dramatic changes. No sudden breakthroughs. Just generations passing. Children learning from parents. Making the same things. Living the same way. Century after century. Millennium after millennium. The silence stretches on. What they left behind tells us almost nothing, and that's the strangest part. You'd think after 160,000 years we'd find something, some sign of progress, some hint that things were changing, but the tools stay the same, generation after generation, the same basic designs, hand axes, scrapers, choppers, stone flaked into familiar shapes, patterns repeated across continents, the kind of tools that work well enough that nobody bothers to improve them. At Kalambo Falls in Zambia, archaeologists found hand axes from 200,000 years ago. They look almost identical to ones made 50,000 years later. Same shape, same technique, same function. That's 150,000 years of making the exact same thing. Think about our world. 50 years ago, we didn't have smartphones. 100 years ago, we didn't have computers. 200 years ago, we didn't have electricity. But for those ancient people, 200,000 years passed with barely any change at all. The Acheulean hand axe tradition lasted 1.6 million years. Started with Homo erectus, continued through early Homo sapiens, the same tool, over and over. They knew it worked. Why change it? At Oloji Sali in Kenya, there's a site where people made these tools with 700,000 years. Same location, same basic design, century after century. You can hold a hand axe from 300,000 years ago and one from 150,000 years ago. Put them side by side. You'd be hard-pressed to tell which was older. The stone tells us they had skill. The flaking is precise. The edges are sharp. They knew what they were doing, but that's all it tells us. No decorations, no patterns that don't serve a function, no marks that might mean something beyond the tool itself. Just utility, just survival. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, the layers from 200,000 years ago show tools. Good tools, well made, but nothing else. No ochre, no shells, no hints of symbolic thinking. The people who lived there were capable. They survived. They passed on their knowledge. But they didn't leave art. Not yet. Across Africa, sites from this period show the same pattern. Tools appear. Tools get used. Tools get discarded. Life continues. Nothing changes. At Pinnacle Point, also in South Africa, people lived in caves overlooking the ocean. They collected shellfish, made stone tools, controlled fire, all the basics of survival, all the signs of intelligence. But for 100,000 years, that's all they did. The hearths show they cooked. The shells show they gathered food from the sea. The tools show they could shape stone with precision. Yet there's no jewellery, no burial goods, no cave paintings. The silence in the archaeological record is deafening. At Claysea's river mouth, another South African site, researchers found evidence of modern humans from 120,000 years ago. The bones show they looked like us. The tools show they thought like hunters. But there's debate about the butchery marks on some bones. Some scientists think they show cannibalism. Others think they're just normal processing marks. Either way, there's no ritual, no ceremony, no sign that death meant anything beyond the physical. Bodies were bodies. Meat was meat. Maybe that sounds harsh, but the evidence doesn't show anything else, not yet. In Israel, at Skul and Kafsa caves, modern humans appeared around 120,000 years ago. They brought their tools with them, the same Middle Stone Age technology from Africa. They lived there for thousands of years, then disappeared. Climate changed, resources shifted, they either died out or moved on. But while they were there, they left the same basic toolkit, the same simple way of life. No innovation, no art, no symbols, just survival. The Levallois technique shows up during this period. It's a way of preparing a stone core so you can strike off flakes of predictable shape. It's clever, it shows planning, you have to think several steps ahead, but it's still just making tools. Better tools, sure, more efficient, but not symbolic, not cultural. A Levallois core from France looks like one from Africa. The technique spread. People shared knowledge, but that knowledge was purely practical. At Howison's port in South Africa, there's a brief period around 65,000 years ago where tools get more sophisticated, smaller, more refined. Backed blades appear. These are small stone pieces with one edge blunted, probably so they could be hefted onto handles without cutting your hand. It's smart. It shows innovation. But then it stops. The tradition disappears. Tools go back to the older, simpler styles. Whatever sparked that brief flowering, it didn't last. The pattern repeats across the archaeological record. Brief moments of complexity, then regression, then long periods of nothing. It's like watching someone almost figure something out, almost make the leap, but not quite. Not yet. Burials during this period are rare and debatable. At Kafsa Cave, there are some skeletons that might be intentional burials, bodies placed in pits, some with objects nearby. But other scientists argue they're just bodies that happen to be in depressions, natural accumulations, not ritual. The evidence is ambiguous. Even if they were burials, they're simple. No elaborate grave goods, no clear symbolic meaning. Compare that to burials from 40,000 years ago. Bodies covered in ochre, shells from hundreds of miles away, carefully carved ivory. Clear investment of time and meaning. The difference is stark. For 160,000 years, people lived and died and left almost no trace of inner life. At Border Cave in South Africa, there's a burial of an infant from about 74,000 years ago. The baby was placed in a pit with a perforated shell. That's something, a hint of care, maybe meaning. But it's one burial, one moment in 100,000 years, not a pattern, not a revolution. Ochre appears occasionally in sites from this period, red iron oxide, ground into powder. We know later people used it for body paint, for art, for ritual. But in these early sites, it's just there, in small amounts. We don't know what they did with it. Maybe they used it for practical purposes, tanning hides, treating wounds, adhesive for hafting tools. Or maybe they painted themselves, decorated their bodies, expressed something we can't see in the archaeological record. We don't know. The evidence is silent. At Twin Rivers in Zambia, ochre appears in layers from 250,000 years ago, ground and processed, clearly used for something. But what? The stones don't tell us. Shell beads show up rarely, very rarely. A few perforated shells at Blombus Cave from 75,000 years ago. That's late in the gap, near the end of the silence, and even then, it's just a few beads. Not widespread, not common. For most of those 160,000 years, there's nothing like that at all. The tools show they could think, they could plan, they could learn and teach, but they didn't make art, didn't create symbols, didn't leave messages for the future, or if they did, those messages were made of materials that didn't survive. Wood, fibre, skin, sound. Maybe they sang, maybe they danced, maybe they told stories around fires, but wood rots, sound fades, stories die with the storyteller. Only stone survives, and stone is silent. At Katanda in the Democratic Republic of Congo, bone tools appear around 90,000 years ago. Barbed points, harpoons for fishing, that's sophisticated, that's planning for specific tasks. But it's still functional, still practical, not symbolic. The gap isn't about intelligence. These people were smart. They survived in diverse environments, adapted to climate changes, passed knowledge across generations. The gap is about something else, something we recognize as human, the spark that makes us create meaning beyond survival. Whatever that spark was, it hadn't caught fire yet. At Lake Mungo in Australia, there's evidence of cremation from 40,000 years ago. Bodies burned, bones collected, ochre scattered, clear ritual, clear meaning. But that's after the gap, after the explosion. During the 160,000 years of silence, nothing like that appears. The people were there, the brains were ready. But the culture we recognize as human was still waiting for something to change. Nobody knows what that something was. A genetic mutation, a population bottleneck that forced innovation, a cultural breakthrough that spread like wildfire. The evidence doesn't tell us. It just shows the before and after. Before, silence, tools, survival. After, explosion, art, symbols, culture. Everything that makes us recognize ourselves. But the transition, the moment of change, that's still a mystery. For 160,000 years, humans with modern brains lived simple lives, made simple tools, left simple traces, and then, around 70,000 to 40,000 years ago, everything changed, not gradually, all at once. Around 70,000 years ago, something happened. We don't know what, but we can see the results. Suddenly the silence breaks. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, the layers change. Before 75,000 years ago, there are tools, just tools. The same basic stone implements we've been talking about. But then, in the layers from 75,000 years ago, something new appears. Ochre, lots of it, ground into powder, mixed with bone marrow and charcoal, stored in abalone shells. Someone was making paint, not just finding red rocks, actually processing them, mixing them, saving them for later. That takes planning, intention, purpose. And carved into some of those ochre pieces there are patterns, geometric designs, crosshatches, deliberate marks that don't do anything. They're not functional. They don't help you hunt or gather or survive. They're just there, meaning something, to someone. We don't know what they meant. Maybe nothing profound, maybe just doodles, but someone made them. Someone sat down with a piece of ochre and a sharp tool and carved lines into it. For no practical reason at all, that's new. In the same layers there are shell beads, Nassarius shells, tiny snail shells from the ocean, each one carefully pierced, a hole made through the centre. You don't pierce shells by accident. You have to work at it. Use a sharp point. Apply pressure carefully so the shell doesn't crack. These weren't food waste. These were decorations. Someone wore them, strung them together, made jewellery. Why? To look good. to signal something, to mark identity or status or group membership. We do the same thing today, wear jewellery, choose clothes, express ourselves through appearance. But 75,000 years ago, this was brand new. At Sibadu Cave, also in South Africa, researchers found bone tools from 60,000 years ago. Not just bones used as tools, actual crafted implements, awls for piercing, points for hunting, carefully shaped and smoothed, and next to them, compound adhesives, mixtures of plant gum and ochre, heated to specific temperatures, used to attach stone points to wooden shafts. That's chemistry. That's understanding materials. That's experimentation. You can't make that adhesive by accident. You have to know what you're doing. You have to have tried it before, failed, learned, tried again. Knowledge was building. Complexity was increasing. At pinnacle point, people started using heat treatment on stone. They'd take silcrete, a type of rock, and heat it in fire, not to cook it, to change its properties. Heat makes silcrete easier to flake. You get sharper edges, better tools, but you have to heat it to exactly the right temperature. Too cool and nothing happens, too hot and it cracks. Someone figured this out, then taught others. The technique spread. In the Howison's port layers, from 65,000 years ago, tiny stone blades appear. Microliths. Small backed pieces designed to be set into handles. These aren't hand axes. These are components. Parts of composite tools. You make the blade. You make the handle. You attach them with adhesive. You create something more complex than the sum of its parts. That's a different way of thinking. Modular, systematic, and it shows up suddenly. Within a few thousand years, the technology is everywhere across southern Africa. Ideas were spreading. Fast. At Claysy's river mouth, the tool assemblages shift. More variety, more specialised implements, tools for specific tasks rather than general purpose. Scrapers designed for hides, points designed for hunting, blades designed for cutting, each one optimised, each one different. That's innovation. That's creativity applied to practical problems. But it's not just tools. At Mumba Cave in Tanzania, ostrich eggshell beads appear around 50,000 years ago. Not shell from the ocean, eggshell from birds. Someone collected the eggs, broke them carefully, cut circles from the shell, drilled holes, smoothed the edges, hours of work for decoration. The beads are small, uniform, made in sets. People were making things to trade, to gift, to share. Social networks were forming, not just family groups, larger connections. At Border Cave, the infant burial from 74,000 years ago has a perforated shell with it. We mentioned this before, but here's what matters. That shell came from the coast. The burial is inland. Someone carried that shell 40 kilometres. Why? Because it meant something. It was valuable, worth keeping, worth burying with a child. Value beyond survival, meaning beyond function. That's culture. In the Apollo 11 cave in Namibia, painted stones appear around 25,000 years ago. Animal figures, recognisable forms. That's late in the timeline, but it shows the trajectory, from abstract patterns to representational art, from marks to meaning to images. The explosion wasn't instant. It built, layer by layer, innovation by innovation. At Enkapunyamuto in Kenya, obsidian tools show up from 400 kilometres away. That's not a day trip. That's a trade network. Someone travelled, or goods passed from group to group, hand to hand across vast distances. Exchange requires communication, trust, shared understanding of value. You don't trade with strangers unless you have language, unless you can negotiate, unless you have social structures that allow it. All of that was developing. In Europe, things were different but parallel. Neanderthals lived there. They had big brains too. They made tools, controlled fire, survived ice ages, but their tools stayed simple. For 200,000 years, Mysterian technology, the same basic patterns. Then around 45,000 years ago, modern humans arrived from Africa, and within 5,000 years everything changed. The Orinacean culture appears, blade tools, bone implements, carved figurines, cave paintings. At Hohlfels in Germany, a carved ivory flute from 40,000 years ago. 5 holes, carefully placed, tuned to produce specific notes. Someone made music. Not just rhythm, not just drumming, actual melody, pitched sound. They carved a mammoth ivory tusk into a thin tube, drilled holes, tested the sound, adjusted until it worked. That's art. That's expression. That's something beyond survival. At the same site, the Venus of Hohlfels, a carved female figure, exaggerated features, clearly intentional. It's small, fits in your palm, made to be carried, kept, valued. We don't know what it meant. Fertility symbol? Religious icon? Just art for art's sake? But someone spent hours carving it. Someone thought it mattered. In Chauvet Cave in France, paintings from 37,000 years ago cover the walls. Lions, horses, rhinoceros, bears, not crude sketches, sophisticated images, shading, perspective, movement captured in charcoal and ochre. The artist used the contours of the cave walls, made the stone surface part of the composition, created depth and dimension. That's mastery. That's skill developed over time, practiced, refined. You don't paint like that on your first try, which means there were earlier paintings, ones that didn't survive, or ones we haven't found yet. The explosion we see in the record is probably just the tip, the durable remnants of something much larger. At Sungir in Russia, burials from 34,000 years ago show incredible investment. Bodies covered in thousands of ivory beads, each bead carved by hand, each one sewn onto clothing that has long since rotted away. One burial is of 2 children, laid head to head, surrounded by grave goods, spears, carvings, jewellery. Someone spent months making those beads. Someone else buried them with the dead. That's ritual. That's belief. That's a worldview that includes something beyond the physical. At Lascaux Cave in France, paintings from 17,000 years ago show animals in motion, running, leaping. The artist captured movement, energy, life. They painted by firelight, deep in the caves, in total darkness except for their lamps. Why? The caves weren't living spaces. They were special. Sacred, maybe. The act of painting mattered. The location mattered. This wasn't decoration. This was ceremony. In Australia, people arrived at least 65,000 years ago, maybe earlier. They brought the explosion with them, or it developed there independently. Rock art appears across the continent. Ochre paintings, stenciled hands, figures and patterns. At Lake Mungo, cremation burials from 40,000 years ago. Bodies burned, bones collected, scattered with ochre. Clear ritual, clear belief in something beyond death. The explosion happened everywhere modern humans went. Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia. Different expressions, different art styles, different technologies, but the same fundamental shift, from practical to symbolic, from survival to meaning, from silence to expression. At Malta in Siberia, carved ivory figurines from 24,000 years ago, Venus figures, bird sculptures, detailed and delicate. People in the frozen north, surviving harsh conditions, still found time to make art, still needed beauty, still created meaning. That's universal. That's human. In China, bone needles appear around 30,000 years ago. Eyed needles, for sewing. That means tailored clothing, fitted garments, not just wrapping yourself in hides. Fashion, appearance, identity through dress. At Kostenki in Russia, mammoth bone houses from 25,000 years ago. Not caves, constructed shelters. Frameworks of bone covered with hides, architecture, planning, building for the future. The tools get more sophisticated too. Pressure flaking produces incredibly thin, sharp blades. Microliths get smaller, more precise. Spear throwers appear, atlatls that multiply throwing force. Bows and arrows develop. Hunting technology advances rapidly. But it's not just about efficiency. Some tools are beautiful, decorated, made with care beyond what function requires. At Dolní Věstonice in Czech Republic, ceramic figurines from 26,000 years ago. Not pottery for storage, fired clay sculptures, the oldest ceramics in the world, made not for use but for expression. Someone discovered you could shape clay and fire it and it would become permanent. Then they made art with it. The explosion shows up in burial practices. In Europe, bodies start appearing with grave goods. Red ochre sprinkled on the dead, shells, beads, tools. At Skull Cave in Israel, a burial from 100,000 years ago might have a boar jaw with it. That's early, controversial. But by 40,000 years ago, burials are clearly intentional, clearly meaningful. The dead matter. What happens to them matters. That's a complete worldview. That's religion or spirituality or whatever you want to call it. Belief in something beyond the visible. In Africa, the later Stone Age shows the same patterns. More regional variation, more specialized tools, more art. At Apollo 11 Cave, those painted stones we mentioned. At Wonderwork Cave, engravings on rocks, expression everywhere, in every culture, in every environment. The human urge to create, to mark, to leave traces of inner life. It's not survival, it's not necessary, but it's universal. At Kafse Cave, pierced shells from 120,000 years ago might be early beads, or they might be naturally perforated. The debate continues, but by 75,000 years ago there's no debate. Beads are everywhere, intentional, worn, valued. The transition happened, slowly at first, then faster. By 40,000 years ago, the explosion was complete. Culture was everywhere. Art was common. Symbols were universal. The silence was over. What we see in the record is probably incomplete. Wood carvings rotted away. Paintings on exposed rocks weathered off. Songs and stories died with their singers. What survived is just the durable stuff. Stone, bone, ochre, shells. But it's enough. Enough to show the transformation. From people with modern brains but simple lives to people with modern brains and modern culture. The gap closed, the explosion happened, and we became recognizable to ourselves. So what triggered the explosion? Why did everything change around 70,000 years ago? Scientists have been arguing about this for decades. Different theories, different evidence, no consensus. But one idea keeps coming back. One explanation that fits the timeline. Language, not simple communication. Animals communicate. Bees dance. Wolves howl. Chimps gesture and vocalize. But human language is different. It's generative, infinite. You can create sentences nobody's ever said before and people understand them. You can talk about things that aren't there. Things in the past, things in the future, things that never existed at all. You can say, imagine a blue elephant dancing on the moon, and everyone knows what you mean, even though nobody has ever seen it. That's unique. That's powerful. and some scientists think that's what changed. The theory goes like this. Modern humans had the brain hardware for 200,000 years. Big frontal lobes, complex neural networks, all the processing power. But language requires more than brain size. It requires specific wiring, specific connections. The FOXP2 gene controls some of this. It affects how the brain develops, how neurons connect, how we process speech sounds. Mutations in FOXP2 cause language problems. People can't form words properly, can't understand grammar. We share a version of FOXP2 with Neanderthals. They had it too, so they might have had some language ability. But here's the thing, FOXP2 isn't the whole story. Language involves dozens of genes, hundreds of neural pathways. Getting all of that working together might have taken time, even after the brain was the right size. Maybe around 70,000 years ago, the final pieces fell into place. Some small genetic change, some new neural connection, and suddenly full language was possible, not just words, not just names for things, but grammar, syntax, the ability to combine words infinitely, the ability to say, if we go to the river tomorrow, we might find fish, future tense, conditional statements, abstract planning. That changes everything. With language, you can teach complex skills, not just by demonstration, by explanation. Heat the stone first, but not too hot. Watch for the color change. When it turns glossy, that's when you work it. You can pass on knowledge that took years to learn. In minutes. With language, you can coordinate, plan hunts, divide tasks, work together in new ways. You circle left. I'll wait here. When the antelope runs, drive it toward the cliff. Complex cooperation becomes possible. With language, you can build social structures, establish rules, create hierarchies. The eldest speaks first, then the hunters, then everyone else. Culture becomes transmissible, stable, cumulative. But more than that, language lets you think differently. When you have words for concepts, you can manipulate those concepts mentally. You can reason about things abstractly. Without language, you think in images, sensations, immediate experiences. With language, you can think about thinking, plan about planning, dream about dreams. You can ask why. You can wonder what if. That's symbolic thought. That's the kind of cognition that creates art and religion and science. Some researchers point to the timing. Language genes show signs of selection pressure around 100,000 years ago, maybe earlier. The mutations were spreading, becoming fixed in populations. By 70,000 years ago, maybe everyone had them. Maybe that's when the threshold was crossed. Full grammatical language, universal across all human groups, and within a few thousand years the explosion begins. Derek Bickerton proposed this in the 1990s. He called it the language bioprogram hypothesis, the idea that language emerged suddenly, not gradually, all at once when the right neural machinery was in place. Other animals have proto-language. Chimps can learn sign language. They combine signs, make simple requests, but they never develop grammar, never create new combinations beyond what they're taught. Human children do this automatically. By age 2, they're generating sentences they've never heard, applying rules they were never taught. That's innate. That's hardwired. But the wiring might be recent, might have clicked into place relatively late in our evolution. Noam Chomsky argues for a language organ, a specific brain structure dedicated to grammar, universal across all humans. He calls it universal grammar, the deep structure underlying all languages. Every human language has nouns and verbs, subjects and objects, ways to ask questions, ways to negate statements. The surface details differ: English, Chinese, Swahili. They sound completely different, but underneath they follow the same basic patterns, the same deep rules. That suggests biological programming, not just cultural invention. And if that programming appeared suddenly, it would explain the gap. For 200,000 years, humans had big brains but no full language. They communicated, made sounds, gestured, coordinated basic activities, but they couldn't express complex thoughts, couldn't share abstract ideas, couldn't build cumulative culture. Then the language capacity emerged, and everything changed. The evidence fits, sort of. Symbolic artifacts appear right after the proposed language emergence. Beads, carvings, patterns. Why would you carve patterns unless you could think symbolically? Unless you could assign meaning to abstract marks? Language and symbolism go together. They're two sides of the same cognitive coin. Burial practices appear around the same time. Bodies treated with care, grave goods included, that suggest belief in an afterlife, or at least some concept of death as meaningful. You can't have those beliefs without language, without words for death, for spirit, for whatever comes after. Trade networks expand dramatically after 70,000 years ago. Goods moving hundreds of kilometers. Trade requires negotiation, agreement on value, trust between strangers. All of that needs language, complex language. Population genetics show something interesting too. Around 70,000 years ago, human populations start expanding, moving out of Africa, spreading across the world. Maybe language made that possible. Better coordination, better knowledge sharing, better adaptation to new environments. Groups with language could outcompete groups without it, could survive in harsher climates, could hunt more effectively. The advantage would be enormous. Within a few thousand years, language-capable humans would dominate, their genes would spread, their culture would flourish, and that's what we see in the record. But there are problems with this theory. First, we can't prove when language emerged. Soft tissue doesn't fossilize. We can't examine ancient vocal cords or neural pathways. We can look at skull shape, the hyoid bone that supports the larynx, brain case structure. Those things suggest language capacity, but they don't prove it. Neanderthals had similar anatomy, similar FOXP2 genes. Did they have language too? Some researchers say yes, others say no. The debate continues. Second, the explosion isn't perfectly synchronized. It happens at different times in different places. Southern Africa shows symbolic artifacts by 75,000 years ago. Europe doesn't show them until 45,000 years ago. If language emerged suddenly and spread everywhere, you'd expect more uniformity. Unless language emerged in Africa first, then spread to other populations later. That's possible. That fits the genetic evidence, but it's not certain. Third, some symbolic behavior might be older. The 300,000-year-old ochre use we mentioned, the possible shell beads from 120,000 years ago. If symbolic thought existed that early, maybe language did too. Maybe the gap isn't about language at all, or maybe early humans had simple language, proto-language, enough for basic communication but not full grammatical complexity. And the explosion represents the emergence of fully modern language, the final step. That's what some researchers propose, a gradual process. Language ability is increasing slowly, reaching full capacity around 70,000 years ago. The problem is, language doesn't leave direct evidence. We're inferring from artifacts, from behavior, from genetics. All of those things are indirect, suggestive but not conclusive. Still, the language theory remains popular. It explains a lot. It explains why the explosion happened suddenly, why it spread rapidly, why it was universal. It explains the connection between symbolic artifacts and complex culture, between art and religion and technology. Language enables all of it, makes it possible, makes it transmissible. Without language, each generation starts over, learns by watching, copies what works. With language, each generation builds on the last, adds new ideas, refines old ones, knowledge accumulates, culture grows, complexity increases. That's what we see after 70,000 years ago. Rapid acceleration, continuous innovation. The silence breaks because people can finally talk to each other. Really talk. About ideas, about possibilities, about meaning. They can tell stories, share dreams, explain their art. They can say, "I made this because," and everyone understands. That's powerful. That's transformative. It changes what it means to be human. Some researchers go further. They argue language changed consciousness itself. Julian Jaynes proposed that early humans lacked internal dialogue. They didn't have that voice in their head, that constant mental narration. He thought consciousness emerged with language. That self-awareness requires words. That's controversial. Most scientists disagree. But it's an interesting idea. Maybe before language, humans experienced the world differently, more immediately, less reflectively, and language created the mental space for introspection, for planning, for imagining alternatives. That would explain the gap, not just behaviorally, but experientially. The world before language was different, not just technologically, fundamentally. We can't imagine it. We think in words. Our entire mental life is linguistic. But for 200,000 years, humans thought without words, experienced without language, lived without that inner voice. Then something shifted. The words came, and with them, a new kind of mind. That's speculation, beautiful speculation, but speculation nonetheless. We don't know what it was like to be human before language. We never will. But we know something changed. We see the results, and language remains the best explanation we have. The theory that fits the evidence. That makes sense of the timeline. It's not proven. Maybe it never will be, but it's compelling. It suggests that for most of our existence we were almost human. Almost there, but not quite. We had the hardware but not the software. The brain but not the program. And then, relatively recently, the final piece fell into place. Language emerged, and we became fully ourselves. The beings we recognize, the beings who create and wonder and dream. The silence ended because we finally had something to say, and the words to say it. So, if the language theory says biology changed, there's another idea that goes in a totally different direction. This one isn't about the brain itself or some magic switch for speech. It's about the world those people lived in, their numbers, their environment, their daily reality. In other words, maybe it wasn't the mind that changed. Maybe it was the situation. This theory is called the population density theory. It says the explosion of creativity and culture didn't need a brand new brain. It just needed enough people living close together, enough minds bumping into each other, sparking ideas, enough chance for mistakes, inventions, and for those inventions to actually spread. Let's walk through it. Imagine a small group of people living far apart. Maybe a few families here, a few over there. The world is big. The groups are tiny. There are thousands of kilometers between them. They don't see other bands for months, maybe years at a time. In that world, someone might invent something clever. Maybe a better way to shape a spear. Maybe a simple necklace made from shells. But if that person dies before teaching someone else, the idea just disappears, lost forever. Or maybe someone tries painting with ochre. It looks cool, but nobody else copies it. The person moves to another camp. The paint pots are left behind. Rain washes everything away. It's like the idea never happened. Now picture a world with more people. The groups are bigger. They camp closer together. There's more mixing, more talking, more chances to share new things. Someone invents a trick for making sharper blades. They show a friend. The friend shows someone else. The trick spreads. If one person forgets, it doesn't matter. 10 others remember. The idea survives. It gets improved. Maybe it even turns into something totally different over time. That's the heart of the population density theory. It's not about a breakthrough in the brain. It's about having enough people in close enough contact to keep ideas alive. Here's what the evidence shows. When scientists look at ancient sites, they notice something interesting. Places with higher populations seem to have more complex tools, more art, more variety, more signs of culture. For example, in places where the land could support more people, like coastlines with lots of fish, or river valleys full of plants and game, there's often more evidence of innovation. Groups could gather in larger numbers. They had more contact with neighbours. The chances for learning and teaching went way up. And when times got hard, maybe because of a long drought or too much cold, populations would shrink. Groups would break up, spread out, or even die off. In those times, the record shows a drop in complexity. Fewer fancy tools, less art, simpler living. It's like culture needed a certain critical mass, a tipping point. Below that, ideas just faded away. Above that, they could snowball. Each person didn't have to invent everything for themselves. They could copy, adapt, combine, remix. That's how things started to build. One scientist, Mark Thomas, put it this way. Imagine culture as a bonfire. If there aren't enough people to gather wood, the fire goes out. But if enough people keep adding sticks, the fire keeps burning. It even gets bigger. Think about the game of telephone. If there's only 2 people, the message is simple. If it's just 3 or 4, it gets a tiny bit more interesting. But if you have 20, 30, 50 people, the message twists and shifts. It can become something new. In small groups, culture is fragile. In big groups, it becomes strong. It can even grow on its own, as people riff on each other's ideas. Now let's look at the numbers. Around 80,000 years ago, Ice Age conditions made life tough. There weren't many humans. Some studies say maybe just a few thousand left in all of Africa. That's not much. But as the climate warmed, population started to recover. There was more food, more water. Rivers flowed again. Forests returned. The groups grew. They met more often. They formed networks. And then, right around the time we see the burst of art, tools and culture, the population seems to jump. Genetic studies using DNA from living people show signs of a big increase. More people, more mixing, more innovation. Archaeologists also see more sites, closer together, with similar styles of tools and ornaments. That suggests people weren't just inventing things in one place, then forgetting. They were sharing, trading, teaching. This makes sense when you look at how ideas spread today. Take cell phones. If only 5 people in the world had cell phones, the idea wouldn't go anywhere. But when millions have them, suddenly the whole world changes. Apps appear, networks form, users multiply. Or think about music. A song by one person can be good. But when lots of people hear it, cover it, remix it, it becomes something bigger. The culture grows on itself. Back in the ancient world, the same thing applies. If only one village used beads, it wouldn't become a trend. But when beads show up in graves hundreds of kilometers apart, people were copying each other, sharing styles, maybe even competing. There's another piece to this picture. In small groups, everyone knows everyone else. There's not a lot of room for specialists. Most people have to do everything. Hunt, gather, make tools, care for kids. But when groups grow, things change. Suddenly, someone can focus on making the best arrowheads. Someone else is good at finding roots. Another person might be really skilled at painting or carving. Specialization means skills get better. Tools get fancier. Art becomes more detailed. People have time to practice, improve, and invent. Plus, when groups are bigger, there's more room for mistakes. If someone tries something weird and it fails, it's not a disaster. Someone else will still remember the old way. But if the new thing works, it can catch on, spread, become the new normal. In tiny groups, mistakes can be deadly. If you try a new hunting method and it doesn't work, the whole group might starve. There's not much room for risk. But in bigger groups, risk is safer. Experimentation becomes possible. That's how innovation grows. So what about the evidence from actual sites? When archaeologists dig in places where the land could support more people, they find more signs of innovation. The coast of South Africa is a famous example. Caves like Blombos and Sibidu show beads, paint, bone tools, and even what looks like bedding made from plant leaves. The people living there had access to the ocean, rivers, forests, and open grasslands. Lots of food options. That meant bigger groups could live together. They could stay in one place longer, share ideas more easily. And as you go inland, away from the coast, the evidence for complex culture drops off. Fewer ornaments, simpler tools, smaller groups, spread out across big distances. It's not just Africa. Look at Europe during the last ice age. When the ice retreated and the land warmed up, people moved in. Populations grew. That's when you see the famous cave paintings, Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira. Huge gatherings, painted walls that must have taken teams to complete. The same goes for Australia. The oldest signs of art and tools line up with times when the population was growing. Even in North America, when humans finally arrive much later, you see the same pattern. Groups get bigger, and suddenly there's a rush of new tools, art, and buried treasures. It all lines up. But there's more to this theory than just numbers. It's also about networks. Not just the group you're in, but how your group connects to others. Think of it like a web. The more connections, the faster ideas travel. In the past, most groups stayed in their own region, but sometimes trade routes opened up. Maybe someone found a rare shell on the coast and brought it inland. Maybe someone else traded animal skins for stone blades from far away. Those trade routes were like highways for ideas. A new way to make jewellery in one camp could become the latest fashion 100 kilometres away. A better spear tip could spread from one valley to another. When networks broke down because of war, disease, or bad weather, innovation slowed down. When connections grew, culture exploded. There's a simple reason for this. People learn best from other people. You can watch someone make a tool 100 times and pick up tiny tricks you'd never discover alone. You can see a design, copy it, and then add your own twist. Culture is built on copying, but also improving. The more people copy, the more chances for improvement. Now, the population density theory doesn't mean people weren't smart before. It doesn't say early humans were less capable. It just says they didn't have the numbers to keep culture alive. If a group is too small, ideas die with their inventors. If groups are isolated, new inventions don't spread. It's like starting a fire in the rain. Sometimes it catches, but most times it fizzles out. But when there are enough people, and they're connected, the fire grows. The culture snowballs. Each generation starts a little further ahead than the last. Here's another way to think about it. Imagine trying to keep a secret. In a tiny group, secrets are hard to keep. Everyone knows everything, but in a big, busy village, secrets spread, change, get mixed up, and eventually become legends or myths. Culture works the same way. It grows, shifts, and takes on a life of its own when enough people are involved. Some scientists ran computer models of these ancient societies. They created virtual worlds with different group sizes, connection rates, and lifespans. What they found was simple. When group sizes got too small, cultural traits disappeared. When there were enough people, creativity took off and stayed strong. This helps explain why the explosion of culture happened in some places but not others. Where people could gather in big enough numbers, the culture flourished. Where they were scattered, it didn't. It also helps explain why, even after the explosion, there were still places with very simple tools. Not everyone joined in at the same time. Some groups stayed isolated. Some lived in harsh places where supporting big groups wasn't possible. So, what made the population grow in the first place? A lot of it comes down to climate. When the world was cold and dry, food was scarce. People had to spread out to find enough to eat. When it got warmer and wetter, plants and animals thrived. People could stay closer together, and their numbers went up. Some scientists think a few lucky regions, maybe along coasts or rivers, were the first to reach the critical mass for culture. Once those areas started innovating, the ideas slowly spread to other groups as they grew. It's kind of hopeful, really. It means the explosion wasn't just luck or some random mutation. It was something that could happen whenever enough people came together. It also means culture isn't just about genius inventors. Most ideas are small tweaks, little improvements, or clever copies. The more people around, the more chances for those small steps to add up to something big. And it's not just about survival. Once people had enough food and safety, they had time for other things: storytelling, art, music, rituals. Those things only happen when people have a little breathing room, when they feel safe enough to dream. That fits what we see in the record. The earliest beads, paintings, and carvings often show up in places with abundant resources, where people had the time and energy to do more than just survive. So, what's the meaning in all this? If this theory is right, the leap to modern culture wasn't a miracle or a single event. It was the long, slow work of thousands of people, over thousands of years, each person adding their piece, each group passing it on. It means the story of humanity is a story of connection. The more we came together, the more we became ourselves. It's a reminder that culture is fragile. It needs people to keep it alive, to teach, to learn, to share. And it's a reminder that progress often comes from small steps, not giant leaps. From many voices, not just one. The population density theory doesn't answer every question. There are still mysteries, still gaps, but it offers a different lens, not about what changed inside our heads, but what changed between us. It says the silence ended not because we got smarter, but because we got together. Because we built webs of sharing, copying, and improving, and that's what made the difference. But there's a third possibility, one that would change everything we think we know. What if the gap never existed at all? So now, let's try something different. The first two theories we talked about both take the gap for granted. They look at the long stretch of time with almost no change and ask, what was missing? What finally unlocked the flood of new ideas? But there's a third theory that flips the whole question around. It doesn't just look for reasons behind the gap, it asks if the gap was ever real to begin with. Here's the twist. Maybe the silence isn't what it seems. Maybe it's not a silence at all. Maybe the gap is an illusion. Not because nothing happened back then, but because we're looking at it the wrong way. Think about how archaeologists work. They dig, sift, and search for anything left behind. Tools, bones, shells, beads, paintings. But the truth is, almost everything made by ancient people is gone. Most things people used every day just don't survive for thousands of years. Wood rots, leather falls apart, fibers and plant materials turn to dust. Even simple shelters and clothing leave almost no trace after so much time. Imagine if someone came to your town 100,000 years from now and tried to figure out how you lived. If all they found was your kitchen knives and a few plastic forks, could they guess what your life was really like? Would they know about your phone, your stories, your music, your games? Probably not. That's the challenge with early humans. What they made, what they did, and how they thought, it all mostly vanished. We're left with stones and bones, the hardest, most stubborn stuff. Everything else is missing. So, is it fair to look at the silent years and say nothing happened? Or are we just not seeing the whole picture? Here's where it gets interesting. Some scientists started to notice little signs that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as quiet as we thought. Take simple string or rope. It's almost impossible for that to last even a few hundred years, let alone tens of thousands. But we know people needed it. How else would they have tied things together, carried loads, or made traps? If we find a bone needle, we know someone was sewing. If we find a stone with a groove worn into it, that could mean someone was spinning fibre. There are hints like this: marks on tools, wear on bones, stains on ancient stones. They don't shout, they whisper. But if you listen, they start to form a different story. And then there's the problem of what gets found at all. Most of the world has never been carefully dug up by archaeologists. Whole countries are still waiting for their ancient secrets to be uncovered. Even in places where people have searched, digs are small, maybe just a few square meters at a time. The odds of finding the one thing that would change our whole view are tiny. Here's another wrinkle. Many ancient sites are deep underground, hidden by sand, water, or jungle. Some are now underwater, flooded by rising seas after the last ice age. If ancient people built villages along old coastlines, those places are long gone. We might never find them. So maybe the gap is just a trick of what we can see. Maybe people were making art, telling stories, and inventing things all along. Maybe the only reason we find more of it after 70,000 years ago is because those things happen to get preserved. Maybe the real change is just luck. Some things survived, most didn't. Let's look at a few clues. In Morocco, archaeologists found beads made from shells that are over 140,000 years old. That's long before the so-called explosion. These beads are small, but someone drilled them. Someone wore them. They were used as decoration or jewellery. That's culture. That's art. It's not much, but it's there. In Israel, there's a site called Kafse Cave. There, people buried their dead with red ochre, powdered iron that stains everything a deep rusty red. That's not for survival. That's ritual. That's meaning. These burials are at least 90,000 years old. And in South Africa, even earlier, there are signs that people were using pigments. Some shells have tiny holes drilled in them, as if they were strung together. Even stone tools from 160,000 years ago sometimes have traces of colour, as if they were painted or decorated. So, if culture was really there all along, why does it seem to explode so suddenly much later? Here's one answer. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe what we call the explosion is really a trick of numbers. The more people there are, and the more often they do something, the more likely it is that we'll find it later. When populations grow, the odds go up that someone will drop a bead, lose a painted shell, or bury a painted bone in a way that survives. It's not that the first artist suddenly woke up one day. It's just that finally we have enough clues to notice. Think about how memory works. If you only have one photograph from your childhood, that becomes the whole story. When you get an album with hundreds of photos, you see more of the real picture. The quiet years aren't blank pages. They're just pages we haven't found yet. Now let's talk about how science works. Every time someone finds an older piece of art, an older bead, or an older sign of culture, the timeline shifts. 20 years ago, experts thought art began about 40,000 years ago. Then came Blombos Cave with its beads and ochre, pushing that date back to 75,000. Then Jebel Irhoud in Morocco with even older finds. Every few years the start line creeps back. Why does this keep happening? Because the record is thin. Every new discovery could change everything. The gap gets smaller with each new find. There's also the problem of definition. What counts as art? What counts as culture? If we only count cave paintings and carved figurines, the early years look empty. But if we count beads, pigments, decorated tools and rituals, the early record fills up fast. Some experts now say that culture probably grew slowly, not suddenly. That the line between simple and complex is blurry. Maybe the real story is a long, slow build with little sparks all along the way. Let's also consider how ideas spread. In a small group, a clever invention might be used for years and then lost forever. If it's not made of stone or bone, we'll never see it. In another group, someone could invent the same thing, and again, it could vanish. Just because we don't find it doesn't mean it never existed. And here's something else. Not every group would have done things the same way. Maybe one group painted their bodies instead of cave walls. Maybe another told stories or sang songs that left no trace at all. If their culture was oral, passed down by speech, gesture, and memory, it would disappear without a sound. So, the gap could just be the result of what survives. What gets buried, what gets found, what gets preserved by chance. The real story might be full of colour, music, and invention lost to time. Let's flip things around for a second. Imagine someone millions of years from now looking for signs of our world. If all that survived was a single plastic spoon and one broken phone, what would they think of us? They'd miss almost everything that mattered. Our art, our language, our beliefs, even our music. They'd see a gap where there wasn't one. There's a good example from the world of music. Think about songs. If you only find the broken remains of a flute, you might say, music started here. But music could have started long before that. People could have been singing, clapping, or drumming on logs for ages. None of that would survive for scientists to find. It's the same with storytelling. Stories leave no mark in the dirt. They pass from mouth to ear, from generation to generation. Whole worlds can be built from words alone. If you only look for stone or bone, you'll miss them completely. There's another thing to consider. Sometimes new tools or art show up in the record, not because people suddenly got smarter, but because the world changed. Maybe the climate shifted, or animals moved, or new resources became available. People adapted. They tried new things. If those things left behind a trace, we spot them. If not, we don't. So, maybe the explosion of culture was really just the result of a few lucky finds. Maybe we're reading too much into patchy clues. Let's get a little more concrete. In the Denisova cave in Siberia, researchers found a bracelet made from green stone. It's beautifully polished and drilled. It's 40,000 years old, maybe older. For a long time, nobody expected anything like that to exist so far back or so far from Africa. But there it was, hidden for tens of thousands of years, waiting to be found. What else is waiting? What have we missed? Every year, someone finds something that shakes up the old story. Here's another thought. If the gap is an illusion, then maybe the real mystery is why we ever thought there was one. Maybe we're expecting too much drama. We want a before and after, a clear line. But real life doesn't work that way. It's messy, it's gradual, it's made up of small changes that add up over time, and sometimes silence isn't a lack of sound. It's just background noise we haven't learned to listen for. If we look at the big picture, humans have always been creative, always been curious, always trying new things, even if most of it disappeared without a trace. The truth is, we judge the past by what survives. That's all we can do. But it's like reading a book with most of the pages missing. Every so often, someone finds a new page and the story changes. So, what does this mean for the gap? It means the story might be much more complicated than we thought. Maybe there was no sudden leap, no magic moment. Maybe people were slowly building culture all along, and we just haven't found the proof yet. It's a little humbling to think about, honestly. We want to draw neat lines through history. We want answers. But sometimes, all we have are shadows, clues, hints that point in different directions. This theory, that the gap is just an illusion, reminds us to be careful about what we claim to know. It asks us to stay curious, to keep looking, and to remember that the past is always bigger than the pieces we hold in our hands. There's also something kind of comforting about this idea. It means our ancestors weren't just sitting around waiting for culture to arrive. They were living, experimenting, and dreaming all along. Even if we can't see it, their lives were full of meaning. Maybe the lesson here is to be patient with the past, to trust that the big dramatic stories are only part of it, that there's a deeper, quieter history made up of millions of small acts we'll never know. And maybe if we keep searching, we'll keep finding more. A bead here, a painted shell there. Each new piece adds a little more colour to the picture. So, after all these theories, language, population, illusion, where does that leave us? Each one explains something. None explains everything. Maybe the real answer is that there isn't just one answer. The gap is both real and not real. It's a shadow we chase, a question we keep asking. And that's the heart of the mystery. The silence isn't empty, it's just not fully understood. So we have 3 theories, each explains part of the mystery, none explains all of it. What does that tell us? All right, we've got 3 theories on the table, language, population, and maybe the gap itself is just a trick of what survives. So how do they all fit together? What do we really know, and where does it leave us? Let's try to put the pieces side by side and see what the bigger picture might look like. Start with language. Out of all the theories, this one goes right to the heart of what makes us human. Not just grunts or calls, but something way more flexible. Words that can build stories, paint pictures, and teach lessons. Some researchers look at the sudden rise of art, tools, and symbols and say, that's what you'd expect if language took off. But how do you prove it? You can't dig up a spoken word. You can't find a fossil of a bedtime story. What we do have are hints. Skulls showing larger brains, changes in the shape of the mouth, and the sudden spread of ideas. But it's all indirect. Take the hyoid bone, for example. It's a little horseshoe-shaped bone in your throat. It helps with speech. A few have been found from ancient humans. Some look a lot like ours. That suggests talking was possible. But does that mean people could tell stories or sing songs? Not really. It just means they had the equipment. It doesn't say what they did with it. Now, let's add in the population theory. This one is all about numbers. If there aren't enough people, ideas get lost. If a group is too small, inventions can vanish in a single generation. Picture a tribe invents a new tool. Maybe it's a clever trap for catching fish. But if only 10 people know about it, and they move away or die out, the idea might disappear forever. But if there are hundreds or thousands, suddenly things can spread. Someone sees something new. They copy it. They improve it. That's how progress builds up. We see this with modern inventions too. Think about how quickly word spreads today. One person posts a video online. Millions can see it in hours. Now, imagine that same process, but with stone tools or painted shells. Once there's a big enough crowd, ideas bounce around and survive. Population growth doesn't just mean more people. It means more connections, more chances for ideas to last. So did the world fill up with people all at once? Not really. It was slow. But there's evidence that after a certain point things started to speed up. Maybe there was a climate change that made more land livable. Maybe there were new animals to hunt or new plants to eat. As groups grew, they started meeting each other more often. That's when things really start to change. It's like a campfire. You need enough wood to keep it burning. Once it catches, it spreads fast. But then we have that third idea. Maybe none of this is as sudden as it looks. Maybe people were doing all kinds of things, but most of it just disappeared. We're left with scraps, bones, stones, and beads. The rest is gone. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. Every year, archaeologists find something older, something unexpected. A bead here, a carving there. Each discovery makes the story longer and fuzzier. So, which theory is right? Is it language, numbers, or just missing evidence? Maybe it's all of them, mixed together. Let's look at some real examples and see what they tell us. First, there's the case of Neanderthals. For a long time, people thought Neanderthals were simple. No art, no culture, just rough tools. But now that's changing. In Spain, scientists found painted cave walls that are at least 65,000 years old. That's before modern humans arrived in Europe. The paintings are simple, dots, lines, handprints. But they're not random. Someone made them on purpose. Some experts say these must be Neanderthal art. If that's true, it means even other humans were starting to make symbols long before the supposed explosion. There's also evidence that Neanderthals used shells as jewellery. At a cave in Italy, archaeologists found eagle claws with tiny cut marks. Someone had turned them into necklaces or ornaments. That's not about survival. That's about meaning, about style. That's culture. What does this say about the gap? It shakes it up. Maybe the explosion was just the moment when all these little sparks caught fire. Maybe humans and their cousins were both creative. Maybe the difference is just who survived and who didn't. Then there's Indonesia. In a cave called Sulawesi, scientists discovered hand stencils and animal paintings. The oldest one is a picture of a wild pig, painted at least 45,000 years ago. That's just as old as the famous paintings in Europe. For a while, people thought cave art started in France or Spain. But now we know it was happening all over the world. People in different places, separated by huge distances, were all making art at about the same time. What does this mean for the theories? It throws a wrench into the idea that art started in just one place and spread out. It looks more like something in the human mind was ready everywhere. Once conditions were right, enough people, enough resources, maybe the right climate, art showed up. Let's dig into another clue. Tools made from bone and antler. Stone tools are tough and last a long time. But bone is softer. It breaks down, decays, and disappears. Still, in places like Katanga in Central Africa, archaeologists found bone harpoons that are at least 90,000 years old. These are finely shaped, with barbs to catch fish. They show planning, skill, and the passing down of knowledge. It means people weren't just using rocks. They were experimenting with other materials too. But why don't we find more of these? Because most of them are gone. If a bone tool gets left in the wrong place, it just melts into the dirt. Only in rare cases, cool, dry caves or mud with little oxygen does it survive. If most of the evidence is gone, the story will always look patchy. Now think about migration. For a long time, humans lived in Africa. But at some point they moved out, into the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and beyond. Every time a group left, they faced new challenges, new animals, new climates, new problems to solve. Sometimes these moves seem to line up with bursts of creativity. Maybe crossing into a new land forced people to adapt. Maybe they needed new tools or new ways to hunt. That could have sparked new ideas. But migration is risky. Many groups probably vanished without a trace. Others survived and changed the world. The ones who made it are the ones we remember. Let's look at genetics for a second. Scientists can look at DNA from bones and teeth, even ones that are tens of thousands of years old. They can trace when different groups split apart or when they mix together. These studies show that there were bottlenecks, times when the population got really small. Maybe a disaster hit, maybe a volcano erupted, or the climate shifted. When numbers are low, culture can stall. When things recover, there's room for new ideas to spread. There's a famous case called the Toba eruption. About 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano in Indonesia blew up. It was one of the biggest eruptions ever. Ash covered huge parts of the Earth. Some scientists think it nearly wiped out early humans. If that's true, it could have caused a reset. Maybe the survivors had to start over. Maybe they came together, shared ideas, and built something new. Or maybe it just shook up the story and what we see is the result. But again, the evidence is thin. We don't know for sure if the eruption really had that big of an impact. Some places show signs of people living right through it. Others look empty for a long time. Now zoom out and look at the big picture. Around 50,000 years ago, humans started reaching places like Australia. That's a huge step. You can't walk there. You have to cross the sea. That means people were building boats or rafts. They planned trips without seeing the other side. That takes imagination and trust. It also means they had ways to pass on knowledge. If you get one thing wrong, the whole trip fails. So the people who made it must have been good at sharing skills and working together. Here's something else. When humans reach new places, they often cause big changes. In Australia, many large animals went extinct soon after people arrived. Maybe humans hunted them. Maybe they set fires that changed the land. Either way, people were having a big impact. That's something only creative, organised groups can do. Let's turn to art again. In Europe, we find those beautiful cave paintings, Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira. Animals, handprints, even dots and swirls. They're old, some over 30,000 years, but the skill is clear. Some of the animals are shaded to show depth. Some scenes look almost like cartoons with movement and action. That's not just scribbling. That's planning. That's teaching. Maybe it's even storytelling. And think about music. The oldest known instruments are flutes made from bird bones and mammoth ivory. Some are at least 40,000 years old. They have holes for notes just like a modern flute. Someone took time to carve them, tune them and play them. But before these flutes, people could have sung, clapped or drummed. Those sounds are long gone. But the idea of making music could be much older. So when you line up all these clues, a pattern starts to form. It's not a straight line. It's not a sudden leap. It's more like waves, small changes building up, then speeding ahead, then slowing down again. Every theory explains a piece of the puzzle. Language lets us share ideas. More people let those ideas spread and survive. Luck and chance decide what gets left behind. It's not just one thing. It's a whole mix. And here's something to notice. Whenever people find a new way to connect, things accelerate. Maybe it's language. Maybe it's living closer together. Maybe it's inventing ways to remember, like art, music, or ritual. Each new method makes it easier to pass things on. That's how culture grows. But there's still so much we don't know. Every discovery opens more questions. Was there a single spark or a slow build? Did one group invent everything, or did ideas pop up everywhere? Did disasters wipe out knowledge, or did they force people to adapt and create? And what about all the things we'll never find? The singing, the stories, the laughter, the games, the dreams. Those leave almost no trace, but they're just as real. The mystery stays with us. Science can chip away at the silence, but it probably won't ever fill it completely. Maybe that's all right. Maybe the real story is about the search itself, always asking, always learning, never quite finished. One last thought. Every time we find a new clue, we have to rewrite the story. The timeline stretches, the gap shrinks. Tomorrow someone might find something that changes everything again. That's the fun of it, and the challenge. So we're left with a puzzle, a story told in fragments, 3 big theories, all with good points, none with every answer. Maybe the truth is that becoming human was a long, winding road. There were slow years, quiet years, and moments of sudden light. It's not a single leap, but a journey with many steps. And the best part? The search goes on. There's always more to find, more to wonder about, more mysteries waiting in the dirt. But whether we solve this mystery or not, one thing is certain. Whatever happened 40,000 years ago changed everything. So, why does this gap matter? Why do people keep coming back to these missing years, the long silence before the world suddenly fills with art, tools, and culture? It's more than just an old puzzle for scientists. It gets at something deep about us, about what it means to be human. Let's break it down. Start with the basics. For close to 200,000 years, humans who looked like us lived on Earth. They walked, hunted, gathered, and survived. Their brains were the same size as ours. They cared for their children. They made sharp tools and cooked over fire. But for most of that time they left behind almost nothing except stone tools and bones. No drawings, no carved objects, no signs of music or jewellery. Then, almost overnight in the big picture, the world changes. Art appears, shell beads, carved bones, painted caves, advanced tools, ritual burials. It's like the lights came on. Why does this sudden shift matter so much? It's because it draws a line, before and after. On one side, people are surviving. On the other, they're imagining. They're planning. They're dreaming up things that don't exist yet. They're making meaning out of the world. But here's what's really wild. The gap isn't just a detail for archaeologists. It's the doorway to the story of us. Why did it take so long for humans to start acting? Well, human, in the way we understand today. Why did the spark of creativity wait so long to catch? Think about what this change brought. Once art and symbols appear, you get memory. Not just personal memory, but collective memory. A carved bone or a painted handprint can hold a story for someone who'll never meet the maker. It's a message sent across time. That's huge. It means ideas can last longer than a lifetime. That's the root of culture. And that's why the gap matters. It marks the moment when humans went from just surviving to shaping the world with their minds. But let's look closer. What kinds of things show up after the gap, and why are they so important? Take the oldest known beads, for example. In a cave in Morocco called Bismoon, archaeologists found little shells with holes in them. They're about 142,000 years old. Someone collected them, pierced them, and maybe strung them as necklaces or sewn them on clothing. These aren't just decorations. They're signs that people cared about showing who they were. Maybe it was for beauty, maybe for belonging, maybe for belief. But it's not just about survival anymore, it's about identity. Then there's ochre. That red powder shows up in many sites after the gap. People ground it, stored it, and sometimes painted with it. Some bones are even stained with ochre, suggesting people used it in burials. Why bother? Red ochre doesn't help you hunt or keep warm. It's about meaning, maybe a symbol of life, blood, or something else. We can't know exactly, but it's a sign of imagination. And don't forget the tools. Suddenly people start making things like bone needles. They're tiny, with sharp points and even little eyes for threading. That means sewing. That means clothing with seams, not just hides thrown over the shoulders. Better clothes mean you can survive in colder places. That opens up new worlds. There are even more advanced stone tools, projectile points, blades, scrapers. Some are so carefully made, it's clear there was teaching involved. Someone had to show how to make them, step by step. That's passing down knowledge. That's tradition. But the evidence goes beyond objects. In some places, there are signs of planned living spaces. In South Africa, at a site called Sibudu, people built bedding out of leaves and grass. They even use plants that keep away insects. That's not just making do. That's thinking ahead. That's comfort. And then there's the evidence for fire. People didn't just use fire to cook. In some caves, they built hearths in the same places over and over. That means they were gathering, maybe telling stories or singing songs. Maybe that's where language grew strong, around the fire, where words could travel from old to young. Let's step back and ask, what does all this add up to? Why is it such a big deal? Because it shows that humans weren't just copying what came before. They were inventing, adapting. They were making meaning in ways no other animal does. That's the start of culture, and it's the reason we're here at all. Now, here's something to think about. The gap also matters because it's a mirror. It reflects back our own questions. Are we really so different from the people who came before? Or did they have dreams and stories too, ones that just didn't leave a trace? Some scientists say the real change was connection. Once enough people lived close together, ideas could spread and survive. If someone thought of something new, a song, a story, a way to hunt, it didn't disappear when they died. Others picked it up, changed it, made it better. That's how progress works. It's not just the genius of one person, it's the power of sharing. So, the gap is about more than missing evidence. It's about the birth of sharing, teaching, and remembering. It's about when humans became a team. There's another angle to this too. The gap holds clues about risk and reward. For most of that long silence, life was hard. Survival took almost all your energy. There was no extra time to experiment or play. But once things got a little easier, maybe better tools, maybe more food, people could take risks. They could try new things, even if they didn't always work. That's how you get art and invention. It's the space to play, to wonder, to dream. And that's why the gap is so important. It's the moment when life went from just getting by to exploring what else was possible. But there's another reason people keep coming back to this mystery. The gap isn't just about the past, it's about how we see the present. If culture and creativity needed special conditions to appear, then maybe they're not as guaranteed as we think. Maybe they're fragile. Maybe they can fade if we stop sharing, teaching, or imagining. It makes you wonder, what would the world be like if the spark had never caught? If the silence had lasted longer? Would there be music, writing, cities, or even us sitting here thinking about it? Here's something else. The gap is a reminder of how much we don't know. Every time a new discovery comes out, a bead, a flute, a painted wall, it stretches the story further back. It says, wait, maybe people were creative all along, maybe we just haven't found all the clues yet. It keeps us humble. It reminds us that the past is bigger and stranger than we think. And there's something kind of beautiful about that. The gap doesn't just show what's missing, it shows how much is possible. It challenges us to keep looking, keep asking, keep wondering how we got here. There's also a lesson in the way things spread. Once a new idea caught on, like making beads or painting walls, it moved fast. You find the same kinds of art or tools in places thousands of miles apart. That means people were talking, copying, maybe even trading. They weren't just stuck in one place. They were explorers, always looking for something new. This matters because it shows how connection speeds up change. It's like a chain reaction. One person tries something different. Someone else sees it and adds their own twist. Before long, everyone's doing it. That's how culture grows, and it's why the gap matters. It's the start of something bigger than any one person. Now, let's talk about belief. After the gap, there's more evidence of ritual, not just burials, but things like carvings and statues. In Germany, people carved little figures from mammoth ivory. Some look like animals, some are abstract shapes. One famous statue, the Lion Man, is at least 40,000 years old. It's a person with a lion's head. That's not something you see in nature. That's imagination at work. That's belief in things beyond the everyday. Why does this matter? Because belief changes everything. It lets people picture things they can't see. Spirits, gods, ancestors. It lets them tell stories about where they came from and where they're going. That's a big leap from just surviving day to day. And that's why the gap is such a big deal. It's the place where belief, imagination, and community all come together. Here's another layer. The gap matters because it's the edge of the map. Before it, you have people living much like other animals, smart, social, but limited. After it, you have people making choices that shape the world. Farming, herding animals, building homes, making music, writing down thoughts, raising monuments. That's the world we live in now. If you look at the last 10,000 years, everything speeds up. Agriculture, cities, writing, technology. All of it grows from that first leap. The moment people started passing on ideas, building on what came before, the gap is the turning point. But maybe the most important reason the gap matters is this. It's a reminder that change is possible. For thousands of generations, nothing much shifted. Then, in a heartbeat of history, everything opened up. That means the world can be different tomorrow than it is today. It means creativity is always waiting, even if it's hidden for a while. So, when people ask why the gap matters, the answer is simple. It's about where we came from and where we might go next. It's about the power of a single idea, a single spark to change everything. It's about how fragile and rare culture can be, and how lucky we are that it survived. And it's about how much we still don't know. The mystery keeps us searching, digging, and wondering. It keeps us human. Now think about the stories that must have been told, the laughter, the songs, the lessons passed down. Most of those are gone forever. They didn't leave marks in the dirt. But they're the reason anything survived at all. The gap matters because it's the shadow behind every piece of art, every song, every story. It's the silence that makes the music sweeter. It's the darkness before the dawn. And even though scientists keep searching, there are still things the bones and stones can't tell us. The dreams, the hopes, the fears, the feeling of waking up in a world where you can imagine something new. That's why the gap isn't just an old mystery. It's the beginning of everything that makes life rich and strange. It's the story of how humans learn to dream out loud. And yet, after all this, the central question remains. What switched on? We still don't know. We've explored everything we know. Now we sit with what we don't. This is the heart of the mystery, the unanswered question. Why did it take so long? What was missing all that time? Why do the traces of human imagination wait in silence, then suddenly fill the world? Let's look at the evidence again, but this time, let's focus on what we can't explain. Start with the basics. For hundreds of generations, humans who looked just like us lived, loved, and died. Their hands were the same, their brains were just as big. But if you walk backward through the evidence, there's this deep, quiet stretch where nothing new shows up. It's not just a slow build, it's a flat line. Then, out of the blue, the line jumps. Art, symbols, music, trade, story. Everything we call culture arrives. Why the wait? Scientists keep looking for a single switch. Some think it was language, some think it was community, and others think maybe we just haven't found the right clues yet. But even with all those ideas, there's still a gap. The question keeps hanging in the air. Let's dig into what makes this gap so strange. Think about other animals. When a new tool appears in a group of chimps or crows, it spreads slowly, if at all. It might last for a while, but it rarely turns into something huge. It doesn't change everything about how they live. But with humans, once the spark catches, it lights up the whole world. Why is that? Here's one puzzle. The hardware was there. We know from skulls and bones that ancient people had brains as large as ours. They could feel, plan, and remember. They could shape stones, hunt, and care for each other. But for tens of thousands of years, those brains didn't leave much trace behind. Not the kind we'd call art or culture. What were they doing with all that brain power? Some researchers think maybe they used language, but it was simple, limited to things right in front of them. Others wonder if there were stories, but nothing that lasted. There's no clear answer. That's the problem. The evidence for everyday life, food scraps, fire pits, broken tools, fills the oldest sites. But the evidence for imagination, that's rare and late. Now let's ask a different question. What if we're just missing the clues? Maybe ancient people made art, played music, or told stories, but used things that didn't survive. Wood, grass, skin, or their own bodies. Dance and song leave no mark in the dirt. Stories vanish the moment they're told. Maybe the gap is just what survived, not what happened. Still, the sudden appearance of lasting objects, beads, carvings, painted walls, feels like a real change. It's not just that we find more stuff. The stuff itself is different. It's not just about surviving, it's about meaning. That's what's so hard to explain. Let's try to picture life in the gap years. Imagine a family waking up, gathering food, making tools, caring for children. That much we know happened. But then what? Did they sit around the fire in silence? Did they hum, sing, or tell jokes? Did they wish on stars or dream of other worlds? We don't know. The bones and stones don't say. But here's what's really interesting. When the change comes, it comes in many places at once, not just in one cave or valley. You find beads in Africa, carvings in Europe, painted rocks in Indonesia. Sometimes these things show up thousands of miles and years apart. But the pattern is the same. Suddenly creativity erupts, and the world fills with colour and sound. Why did this happen almost everywhere? And why then? That's the big question. There isn't a single answer. Some experts think it was a chain reaction. Once one group started making symbols, others copied them. Maybe the world just reached a tipping point. Or maybe there were small sparks before, but they always went out. Then, finally, one caught fire. Another thing that makes the gap so mysterious is how long it lasted. If you add up the time, These silent years are more than all of written history put together. Imagine living today and everything anyone ever builds or makes for the next 10,000 years disappears. Then, one day, someone invents paint, and suddenly, the whole world is covered in murals. That's the scale we're talking about. And here's another twist. Even when culture starts, it doesn't show up everywhere at once. Some groups keep using old tools for thousands of years. Others leap ahead quickly. Sometimes new ideas spread fast. Other times they stall. There's no single path, no straight line. It's messy, full of stops and starts. Now, let's talk about the things we do find. Take music. The oldest known musical instruments, flutes made from bird bones and mammoth tusks, are about 40,000 years old. That's old, but not nearly as old as humans. Did people sing before they made flutes? Probably, but there's no way to prove it. The first song is gone forever, or take burial. We find graves with grave goods, tools, beads, red powder, but only after the gap. Before that, not much. Did people care for their dead in other ways? Did they believe in an afterlife, or was death just the end? The dirt doesn't say. Trade is another clue. Once culture explodes, you see things moving long distances. Shells from the sea end up far inland. Stones from a mountain show up hundreds of miles away. That means people were moving, talking, maybe even making deals. But during the gap years, most things stay local. There's little sign of big journeys or networks. Even with all this, the main question stays the same. What changed? Was it a new way of thinking? Was it just a lucky break? Someone tried something new and it stuck? Or was it a slow build hidden from us by time and decay? Here's something else to think about. Other human species lived at the same time as our ancestors. Neanderthals, Denisovans and others. They made tools, cared for each other, and sometimes even made art. But their cultures didn't explode the same way. Why not? Was there something special about our branch of the family? Or did they have their own bursts of creativity that just vanished? Some scientists have looked for a genetic switch, one tiny change in our DNA that let imagination bloom. But so far nobody's found it. The genes for language, for creativity, for memory, they're old. They go back before the gap. There's no clear line in the code. Others look at climate. Maybe the world got warmer or colder, and that pushed people to invent. But the climate shifted many times, and not every shift lines up with a burst of culture. The ice came and went, and people kept making the same tools for ages. Then suddenly something else happened. Another idea is that the way people lived changed. Maybe bigger groups formed, and that helped ideas spread. Or maybe people started seeing themselves as part of a bigger team, us versus them, and that pushed them to create symbols, stories, and rituals. But even these ideas can't explain everything. Here's a strange fact. Some of the oldest art is deep inside caves. People crawled far underground to leave handprints and animal shapes on walls. Why go to all that trouble? Was it for magic? For secret meetings? Or just to leave a mark where it would last? We can guess, but we can't know. And sometimes the evidence just doesn't make sense. In one place you'll find a sudden burst of new tools. In another, nothing changes for ages. There's no simple pattern. It's not like flipping a switch. It's more like a scattered rainstorm. Some spots get soaked, others stay dry. The unanswered question keeps coming back. Why? Why did humans wait so long to start imagining out loud? Why not right away? Why not never? Now, let's try a different angle. Maybe the question itself is a trick. Maybe we're looking for a neat story where there isn't one. History is messy. People are unpredictable. Maybe there was no single cause. Maybe it took a mix, a lucky blend of brains, bodies, weather and chance. Or maybe the story is about loss. Maybe there was art, music and storytelling all along, but it faded away, buried by time. The ground only keeps what's hard and lucky. Everything else, song, laughter, dreams, drifts away. Still the fact remains, after the gap, the world is never the same. Human culture keeps growing. Tools, art, music, language, trade. Each one builds on the last. The pace keeps picking up. But the reason for the first leap is still out of reach. Here's something I keep wondering about. Maybe the real answer is simple. Maybe humans always had the spark, but it needed the right moment. A moment when someone took a risk, drew a line, made a song, buried a bead with a friend, and it caught on. Sometimes all it takes is one act of bravery, or one moment of wonder. Or maybe, as some people say, we can never know. The past is too far away, the clues too faint, the question too big. Maybe that's okay. There's something beautiful about this mystery. It reminds us that not everything can be solved. Some puzzles don't have answers. Some stories are just out of reach. But that doesn't mean they're not worth thinking about. In fact, maybe the mystery is what keeps us curious. Maybe it's what makes us want to learn, to dream, to imagine worlds we'll never see. So, as we sit with this unanswered question, maybe the best thing we can do is keep asking, keep wondering, keep searching for lost songs and forgotten dreams. And maybe, just maybe, that's what it means to be human after all. And now, as you drift towards sleep, think about this. So now we reach the end of this long mystery. We travelled from the first people who looked like us all the way through the long quiet years before the world filled with colour, music and story. It's a strange road, isn't it? You start with a puzzle. Why did nothing seem to happen for so long? How could humans, built like us, live for so many years without leaving behind the things we now call human? Paintings, jewellery, songs and stories. We've followed the clues. We've looked at bones and stones, at beads and carvings, at the shapes of old skulls and the ashes from ancient fires. We've talked about theories, language, population, the weakness of what survives. Each idea offers a piece, but none of them solves the full riddle. There's always something missing. It's like staring at a jigsaw puzzle with a chunk gone from the middle. No matter how you squint, you can't quite see the full picture, but let's step back for a second. Maybe the real lesson isn't about what we don't know. Maybe it's about what we do see. Think about what we've learned by exploring this gap. For one thing, it shows how fragile memory is. Most of what people made, felt, or dreamed just fades away. After hundreds of thousands of years, only the hardest things survive. Stones, bones, the rare shell bead, or a painting hidden deep in a cave. Everything else, every song, joke, hope, or fear, vanishes almost completely. That's humbling. It's a reminder that our records, our memories, are always incomplete. It's easy to think we know the past, but really we're looking through a tiny window. There could have been whole worlds of meaning lost forever. Maybe some group did invent music or art, but their creations rotted in the ground, or washed away in a rainstorm. Maybe the first storyteller never left a mark at all. But there's another side to this. The things that do survive, those first beads, the carved animals, the painted hands, are so powerful. They show us that sooner or later, people reach for something bigger than survival. They wanted to leave a mark, to be remembered, to send a message across time. And that's something we still do today. Let's think about this moment. Right now, almost everything we experience disappears as soon as it happens. You laugh at a joke and it's gone. You remember a dream and it slips away by morning. Most of our lives leave no trace at all. Once in a while something sticks. A photo, a story, a song. But even those fade in time. It's as true now as it was back then. So maybe the long silence in the record isn't really a failure or a mistake. Maybe it's normal. Maybe most of what matters always vanishes, no matter how much we try to hold on to it. The things that last, those rare flashes of creativity, are special because they survived against the odds. Here's something else to think about. Progress isn't steady. People often imagine history as a straight line, always moving forward. But real history is messy. Sometimes nothing new happens for ages. Sometimes everything changes at once. There are leaps, pauses, and even steps backward. The story of human creativity fits this pattern. It's not a slow climb, it's a wild jump. And when that jump happens, it spreads fast. The world fills up with new kinds of beauty and meaning. It's almost as if a dam broke. Suddenly there's art, music, trade, shared rituals. The old way of life doesn't disappear, but it gets mixed in with all these new ideas. We don't know what started it. Maybe it was luck. Maybe someone made a mistake that led to something brilliant. Maybe two groups met and shared ideas. Or maybe a child looked at a shell, thought it was pretty, and wore it as a necklace. That tiny choice could have led to a whole tradition. It's easy to wish for a simple answer. People want neat stories. First there was darkness, then there was light. But real life isn't like that. It's a mix of chance, struggle, and quiet moments nobody ever sees. Here's another thing this mystery teaches us. Humans adapt. We're always changing, always trying new things, even if most experiments fail. The people who lived during the long quiet years weren't stuck or broken. They survived in a tough world. They raised families, found food, and built fires. That's not nothing. That's the foundation for everything that came after. Maybe creativity needs frustration. Maybe you have to feel stuck before you invent something new. Or maybe it's just about waiting for the right person in the right place at the right time. Sometimes the simplest things, like drawing a line in the dirt or humming a tune, can start something huge. And here's one last idea. The gap between what survives and what's lost will always be there. Even now, most of what we care about is invisible to the future. Our dreams, our little rituals, our private joys, they'll fade just like those ancient stories. But that's okay. The important thing is to keep making, keep imagining, and keep passing things on, even if they don't last forever. There's a kind of peace in this, if you're willing to see it. The mystery isn't a problem to solve. It's an invitation. It pulls us to ask questions, to wonder, to look for meaning where none is obvious. Maybe that's the real lesson from the prehistoric gap. Not that we need every answer, but that we keep searching anyway. So as you let your eyes close, think about those people from long ago. They lived, hoped, worried, and tried to shape their world. Most traces are gone, but a few survived. That's enough to remind us we're part of the same story. We're still asking the same questions, still dreaming the same dreams. In the end, the gap doesn't separate us from them. It connects us. The silence in the record is like the quiet before a song begins. It's a space full of potential, of things waiting to be found. We'll never solve every mystery, but we can honor the ones who came before us. By staying curious, by making our own marks, and by sharing the stories we find along the way. As history drifts further into the past, the lines blur, and the answers grow faint. But the questions remain bright, and maybe that's what really matters. So rest easy tonight, knowing you're part of a chain that stretches back through all those years of silence and song. The story isn't finished. It keeps going every time someone wonders why, every time someone dreams,